Everyone to the where you've learned a lot, I'm sure, over the last 3 days, and we're now in the home stretch. Welcome to everyone who's watching at home or in their offices right now, and welcome to all the people who are here. You're here for the Video Everywhere: Technologies and Platforms from Over-the-Top TV to 360 Video and Virtual Reality, which is a lot to cover in one panel. We've got a really terrific group up here. I have spoken to everybody, and I think we'll have a really interesting discussion on what's going on, what are the latest in the technologies and platforms, and just generally what's going on in the Video Everywhere world. So we'll start out, we'll have each of us will introduce ourselves just so you know who's up here. Then we'll have some questions, and at the end we'll leave time for some questions from the audience. My name is Lauren Cole. I'm president of a company called Cole Media. We've been around since 2002. We do business strategy and business planning for all sorts of media companies, mostly in startup and new and growing businesses. Worked with about 140 clients, including some of the bigger names like Netflix, Comcast, NBCU, Anonymous Content, Dreamscape VR, Gracenote, Ovation TV, and a whole bunch of others. Now, I will turn it over to Fredrik to introduce yourself.
Hi, excuse me. Hi, I'm Fredrik Anderson, co-founder of Acido. So, Acido, we design, manage, and build video experiences for pay TV companies and media companies such as HBO, Netflix, DirecTV, Sky, those kind of companies.
I'm Peter DeWitzik, Vice President of Media for Quello Media Solutions. Quello started off as a B2C OTT stack for concerts, and we have then taken that stack and white labeled it, and we are now servicing Acorn TV and a few other properties, but it is a pretty recent endeavor and backed by Gary Winnick.
I'm Jeff Stansfield from Advantage Video Systems. We're a systems integration company who does live streaming with VR and standard videos. We work off of a lot of, where we specialize in is in asset management and metadata tagging and the ability to monetize in different ways.
I'm TK Arnold. I'm your token journalist. I have nothing to sell. I'm not going to say anything about metadata, but I can give you a pretty good big picture view about where I see our business going. I run Home Media Magazine, which has been a trade magazine for home entertainment since 1979, and I also contribute to Variety and LA Times and USA Today.
I'm Nathan McGowan. I'm the head of digital product for a media group that includes Hollywood Reporter and Billboard Music. So we're very entertainment, news focused, primarily ad supported, and that's really where our strategy is right now.
Hi, my name is Blair Harrison. I'm the founder and CEO of Frequency. We're a software company. We build and operate a platform that provides services to content providers and mobile TV and over-the-top operators. We enable content providers to manage and package and distribute and monetize their content. And we provide an end-to-end video service primarily for digital-first video content for our operator distribution partners.
Great. So let's start really big picture, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty. And I'll open this up to everybody, but I thought maybe we'd start off where TK can start to answer the question. I want to know where we are in the growth cycle of over-the-top services and VR. We're here obviously at Digital Hollywood, so we're very involved in it, and being in Los Angeles, everybody's very involved in it. But in the scheme of consumers around the United States and maybe around the world, where is it? Is it still very early days? Are people starting to make the shift, or are people have they shifted a lot of their viewing habits to over-the-top services, or is it still people are really watching TV, DVD, and this is still pretty new?
I can say yes to just about everything because one thing you'll find is that OTT definitely is all over the place. It's also the ultimate manifestation of customer choice, which is a trend that began back when cable first came out, and we no longer had only 3 channels to choose from. Then it came home video, VOD, everything else, and everything gave the consumer more and more choice. OTT is the ultimate choice because you don't have bundles, you're not going to be told what to do, and there's certainly no programming. You don't have to adjust your schedule to somebody else's schedule as you do with TV. That said, linear television is still, which everybody seems to be giving up for dead every year, is still far and away the biggest eyeball attractor. In an earlier panel that I did, there were some interesting statistics that came out and showed that linear television is getting about 5 times as many eyeballs as Netflix and over the top. Over the top, of course, it's really a term that everybody kind of uses to signify anything right now. And the true over the top, it was originally a way by Netflix to deliver entertainment in the cheapest, easiest possible way, which feeds right into the basic human desire to have as much content as they can, as cheap as possible, and as easily accessed as possible.
What do the rest of you think? Are we still in early days on over the top, and it's not really, it's just getting here, or is it like how many years? Is there a time we're going to be watching everything over the top, or what do you?
I think you've got to decouple over the top. You've got to decouple the businesses from the model for delivering stuff to people. Because in one regard, over the top is to TV as the web was to newspapers. It's about lots more creators, lots of different distribution mechanisms, different models that obtain as these distribution models change, just different business models. So in one regard, we're right at the beginning, because if you don't have to dig up streets and do all the other expensive things that non-over-the-top signified in TV, well, you'll do it. You'll deliver things wirelessly and deliver them to portable devices, the cost of which will vanish. So in one regard, we're right at the beginning. But whether the experience of watching linear television falls off a cliff, I don't think so. I think the nature of the content that's being packaged in those channels changes significantly. And having to sit in one room with one box is already over. But no, I think people continue to watch things when they're on in the same way that you want to chat to people live.
I think that I agree in one part, and I think that we've begun to define it. I think over the top is, what we call over the top has been here, and we've been around, and it's been around. People have been doing this thing for many, many years, and we've developed the strategies for it. It's just we've only in the last three or 4 years have really been able to define it and been able to see where it can take us. And the networks and the larger networks and large that have blossomed out because of it have been able to put more money into it, and that spurs more creativity, and also the fact that the general public can get into it and can affect an over-the-top platform is also something that has spurred it even further.
I mean, it's pretty simple. If you look at the consumption patterns of the next generation, they're watching content off their applications, off of different devices, connected devices, and not wanting to spend the money for traditional TV. So it's right in front of us. You have to embrace it. Problem is, a lot of people, as you meant, they don't understand what OTT actually means. It's misunderstood by a lot of people in the industry.
And anybody want to take a shot, since we're an OTT and VR, of where is the state of VR in a nutshell? I know Frederick.
State of the art or state of the business?
State of the business.
It reminds me of that saying that venture capitalists either use or talking about the nature of venture capital is you don't want to be too early, or too late. And I think we're somewhere just before, just after the third early.
Yeah.
Very true.
Good point.
It's like DRM back in the day.
No, it's early days, of course, but I think we need more content. That's for sure. And in the beginning, I think we'll see VR and OTT will probably be an extension of existing OTT services. But as we have more VR content out there, there will probably be dedicated VR services as well.
Sorry, go ahead.
VR is still really in the definition stage. In other words, it's not even, forget about marketing and commercializing it. How do we make films in VR? And that's the next big challenge for Hollywood. There's opportunity there, and they're all excited by it. But for example, early on, people were talking about, well, you can tell a different movie from a different person's perspective. But that doesn't always work. Let's say you have a scene where a girl loses her boyfriend, and he's angry, and he slams the door, and then the camera pans, and you see her face with a single tear falling down. If VR, if you're her character, you don't see that money shot, and if you're the boy, you're out the door. You don't see it either. So we have to completely reinvent how we're making movies.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we work with in a lot of our clients is in proper storytelling, because storytelling for 2D and storytelling for VR is entirely different. You know, I see a lot of content providers fill every aspect of the space in VR with something that's happening, and you know, any advertiser will tell you that, you know, you don't do that. I also think that you know, with one of the things that came out of Facebook, you know, Facebook owns Oculus, and Facebook has announced that they're putting money into deleting, getting rid of the goggles. The goggles have got to go.
That's right.
Everybody knows the goggles have got to go. And the reason why people cannot watch VR for more than 5 minutes or 10 minutes is because when I'm standing here, my brain knows where center of gravity is. When I put on goggles and I'm removed into another environment, my brain has no idea where center of gravity is, so I get disorientated. So, you know, and there's a lot of people playing. There's I met with one producer who's actually planning on doing a Broadway play in VR, and we've been playing around with doing a VR play of Midsummer Night's Dream, where people are going back and forth from reality world to the fantasy world and putting on and off glasses, and so that's where people are planning. So as soon as we can get rid of the glasses and get rid of and enter into a true VR, what the next step of VR is, VR will become better in a long form, you know, so the short form where it's at, and it's never going to go anywhere until we can go into more longer form.
Let's talk a little bit from the content owner or publisher perspective. How important is it? Because we're still early in the market. It sounds like the technology is getting kind of ironed out. Business models are starting to form. But how important is it for companies to be experimenting with both over-the-top video and VR today? I know, Nathan, you represent the content side on our panel. What do you think? Where do you think people need to be?
So we're having a lot of success with a multi-platform video strategy. End of last year, we've grown from about 80 million video views a month to over 200, and it's we have pretty effective ways of monetizing that with platforms that don't include OTT. And VR, I think, is especially challenging. So we feel fine not being in that space yet, although we think it's really interesting. I think for us, we recognize there's lots of challenges with OTT, whether you want to go subscription or ad-based or some combination. It just doesn't look as promising as you know, how we monetize directly sold and programmatic campaigns for video across our own platforms, which is about 40% of our video views, and then all these other emerging platforms. So I think, you know, for us, we always want to make sure we're bringing value to the audience, and, you know, connected to that, thinking about monetization, and we haven't found a clear path yet, although it's something we definitely track.
On the advertiser side, are the streams on over-the-top devices now counted in with the other web streams? Like, can you go to an advertiser and say, I have this many views across my Android and my iOS platforms, but also on my Roku, or is it still?
Yeah, I mean,
a
you want to
little hard
track
measure?
everything. So you want a big whole number, even though it's multi-platform, and, you know, depending on whether you're leveraging something like ComScore, which has more limitations than, you know, if you use your own metrics. That helps with the number, and that shows your reach. And I think we recognize that OTT, there's some turnkey ways to do it that are probably pretty affordable, but I think we want a deeper library and more frequency of video to compete with all that choice, because your options in OTT are incredible right now. And I don't think we necessarily want to create the choice just yet of being up against Netflix and HBO and things like that. We're doing very well on other platforms, but we have done some interesting things with 360, and I think we've seen good results. And because we do a lot of events, we're at a lot of award shows and music festivals, that's very appealing for our audience, and I think we'll do more there. I think VR's probably more prohibitive than us because it's so technology oriented, and you mentioned just the physical products you need to make it work. But we've done some things with AR that I think make a lot of sense for us, and can, again, enhance the events that we participate in. And it's fairly cheap, I think, to execute some experiences that are pretty compelling. So that's what we're looking at.
What do the rest of you think? Is it time for companies to get in? And which companies? Is it only the really big companies that can afford to get in and experiment now? Or is it starting to get broader? Or is it startups? Like, where do you guys think on the...
I'll speak up here because Quello Concerts is a platform. It's an OTT platform. We've been around since 2009, and the demographics of the content lends itself to about a 35 to 55-year-old, whereas VR will take us into the more relevant millennial, if you will. So we're adding it to, NAB, we did a press release with Nokia to be part of their platform of monetization. When you think about video, you have to equate it to monetization strategy, clearly, and the issue we have back to the device is lack of mass adoption. So once again, you get rid of the goggles, it's going to be reality, but it can be used in a strategy of reaching to a different demographic. And we're seeing, because of the music side of the business, a lot of new opportunities come in that are related. So music and sports are probably the two biggest areas right now where VR is being requested, and we're actively developing against that, and we're contractually obligated to deliver against it as well. So we're actually embracing that path as a fast forward.
Go ahead.
No, I can just add to the OTT side that, I mean, the whole value chain is being redistributed. So being a media company not experimenting with OTT would be scary, for me at least, because you will have to have a customer relationship at some point and get the data to be able to decide a future business.
Go ahead. Is it important for companies, eventually, if you're a big company, strategically, do you want to do a lot of the work yourself, or is it a business that people should outsource? And, I know, I've just watched, like, the studios seem to do a lot in-house, move it out, it goes back and forth. I mean, where do you think, is there any strategic advantage to outsourcing a lot of these services if you're a big content company, or will it be outsourced for a few years and then eventually come back in-house?
I think it's eventually going to come in. I think right now it's mostly outsourced because most companies don't want to invest in all the hardware and all the specifics that needs to. You have to buy 8 or 16 or 32 times the cameras and that same in storage and all that stuff, and then the expertise as far as knowing how to use the equipment and all that stuff. And the amount that companies, like Frederick's companies, is being used with VR is actually more of a bonus environment. So, a lot of productions are doing the production in 2D and then creating a VR portion of it to reach out to a market that is not, to draw those markets into their standard movie. So, and that's what happening with a lot of platforms are creating that, even in sports. Like what Peter was saying, it's important that they create that element, but not having the expertise in the element, it's cheaper to outsource it in that. Eventually, all that, when we really define where VR comes is going to end up, it'll all come out in-house.
Absolutely. And I think the same question should go for OTT in itself, because you see any three, whether it's Warner Brothers or Disney, a lot of it, they have to own a piece of that OTT technology, or they feel like they need to, but the reality is they're losing 20 million, millions and millions of dollars each year by having that control right now. So I think you're going to see, the ownership move over to outsourcing after the guys up top realize that it just doesn't make sense, and In-N-Out Burgers is not making chicken, so.
Let's talk a little bit about business models. That's my favorite topic. I'm curious, where's the market today? Like, where are companies making money? Let's start with over the top in particular. I'm sort of intrigued because there are so many services launching. I know, Blair, when I talked to you, I was sort of intrigued by the fact that you had gone direct to consumer, and now you're actually making it a business to business play. And maybe you could explain a little bit about what you're doing and why you made that switch. And then I'll be interested in hearing from others, like where can you make money today? What are the best ways to monetize over the top video?
Well, we're a software company at heart. We think of ourselves as a software company, and if you follow that train of thought, you end up not being in that many direct-to-consumer businesses, certainly early on. Our initial applications we built because we wanted to demonstrate our technology. We wanted to prove out our thesis that this was a great way for consumers to watch content, and it was 7 years ago. we're not really making a bet on direct consumer versus business to business. We're in the business to business. We license and sell software to people. The bet we're making was really two. One is we're making the somewhat obvious bet that video is going to continue to grow in a nonlinear way dramatically, and that's true. I mean, every surface in this room is a candidate for having video on it, so at the moment there are none of them. And more importantly, that the growth in content providers, because we sort of live between those two. We live between the content providers and the distributors. That the growth in content providers is going to be, again, highly nonlinear. It's going to grow in a dramatic way. And that there's going to be 1 million more entrants into the direct consumer business trying to create new video services for people. It's very easy to stand and look at Netflix and Amazon and, put your pen down because they're so big and they're going to get so much bigger. But that's not the natural order of things. Natural order of things is there'll be thousands of businesses springing up with a different approach to user interface, a different approach to the intelligence, machine intelligence. You're going to need to make recommendations, and different approach to video. There'll be whole new media types and formats for video that no one's thought of. VR being just one of them, AR being, having components of it. But if you believe those two things to be true, then it's a really good idea to be selling shovels in that gold rush, which is the way we think about what we're doing.
So I'm curious why the cable companies why would they use a middleman if isn't their core business technology, or are they, why wouldn't they? I was intrigued talking to you because I would have thought they would do that themselves.
I think every company's, everyone has a concept of a supply chain. In our world, it's a soft, digital, virtualized one. Right? If you look at the supply chain from shooting video to distributing it to people, there's a whole bunch of services en route. Every company has its sort of DNA and excellence, right? And things that they've decided to bet on. Nobody bets on this whole supply chain, whether you're in the digital business or the physical business. I think with television operators, they've all made the following, traditional MVPDs, they've all made the following decision, which is that they're really in the business of delivering the best content they possibly can to consumers. That looks different today from yesterday, and it'll look different tomorrow. I think in terms of why they work with, and why they do work with someone like us, if you think about what over the top means from beginning to end, it doesn't just mean you're using someone else's home broadband pipe to deliver video to a TV screen, which is, as you were saying, about the way Netflix began. It's over the top in every single sense, from creation to the services like us that are aggregating and managing that content, and then of course all the way through to the consumer. And you've got, for example, in terms of scale, we add more video assets to our service in a day than basically any television operator on earth has in total in their entire service. If you include on demand, all the stuff in the EPG, TVOD, SVOD, everything they've got, we had more assets in a day than any TV service on earth basically has in their entire portfolio. And you don't solve that scale problem just by wanting to. It's like a whole qualitatively difficult and different problem across the board. So I think that's why. That's why they come to us for expertise and all the other things that we do.
Yeah, and where the rest of you think, what are the business models? Like where would you focus, making money today?
If I look at our customers around the world, it's definitely SVOD, which is the big thing now. But I think two things will happen because there's only so much money that you can spend on SVOD services in every family. So you will see that AVOD will increase, and we also see that there are new types of aggregators coming out, like we have Amazon, and there will be others like Crunchyroll, which essentially becomes smaller versions, like a virtual pay TV company aggregating other SVOD services for a specific niche. It might be Japanese animation or comedy or different niches.
And the monetization is going to depend on the region too. So, Asia obviously it doesn't embrace AVOD like we do here. So
is that consumers or is that the advertisers?
It's just the CPMs aren't high enough to justify the business. Okay. However, that's changing. So if you can add better technology to get better monetization, then you can change that. There's a few examples out there, but The key is to have a platform or to select a platform that will give you the ability to multivariate or to test in different geographical regions. So you might have an SVOD service that works in Latin America, but it doesn't work in Asia Pac. So your back end, and this goes back to what Blair is saying, having enough of that technology where you've learned through your mistakes, and you're providing that. So what we've done is we've rolled out similar to BAMTech, our own B2C. So we've learned over 8 years what those mistakes are, and you make iterations to those, and you then profit from the market on a distribution scale geographically that can take advantage of monetization in different regions.
So I think that the network model and all this is going to collapse at one point, because in every industry you can see a trend of kind of like a roller coaster where you have few networks, a few businesses, and then everybody starts to get into the business, and you have multiple networks, and the problem is that there's only so many users for so much content. There can be a million. At one point, we're going to reach a plateau of how many networks we're going to have, and then networks are going to start stretching and going out of business, and larger networks are going to swallow them, and then it'll go in a circle, and it'll happen again and again and again, like every industry it happens. Where the business model is not in content producing or content distribution, but it's going to be in metadata and how you handle metadata. Our device, we don't have any televisions anymore. We have devices, and when I walk up to a TV, the TV knows that I walked up to it. When I leave the room, the TV knows that I left the room, got in my car, drove to Target. It knows that. It knows what I bought at Target, and all that metadata is important data that is valuable, and that helps companies develop a game plan to sell to me. Because that's the ultimate cause of everything, is to sell me something. So I think that all this thing of all these companies coming out and producing is going to collapse at one point, and the companies are going to be swallowed by larger companies, and we'll have a few companies, not 3 like it was in the starting, but we'll end up with a top 20 or something like that. And I think that's what's coming. I think companies that embrace metadata. If you embrace metadata and you start adding metadata to your platform, not just how you give metadata to the consumer, but how you ingest metadata from the consumer, that's gonna be where the money's gonna be.
Okay, just a comment on that. So we talked about DNA and why pay TV providers don't do this themselves. So most pay TV providers globally are happy if they can do 1 feature upgrade per year. And we have companies like Netflix. They have 5 versions of the Netflix service every day running, and they pick the best one and go and innovate again. So it's a difference in.
Where do you guys see, just one more question on this, and then we'll switch topics, but I'm curious, are any of the smaller SVOD services making money today? And if not, where do you expect, like how long will they give it, or how many years will it be till these these smaller services can grow and be real businesses, or will they go out of business before they get there? Anybody have a thought?
I don't think many are making money, if any. Without naming names, I think anyone sub $1 million, I can't imagine they're making money, and there's lots that are sub $1 million. They'd like you to think they're not, but I think the number that are above $1 million in the U.S. is, you can count on
Probably one hand,
probably,
right?
yeah,
Two
just
hands?
about. No, I think one's good. I think one hand.
I mean, if you do the math between content acquisition and if you're doing a rights deal that's 60-40, and then Apple's taking 30% in-app purchasing, you're left with peanuts. I mean, it's not enough. So, the major networks own that content. They can do it a little bit better. They can hit larger volumes. So clearly they're at an advantage. But it is betting on the future, clearly.
And then the studios are taking the small guys and taking their tax credits, and I mean that's the newest thing that they're doing. Is Netflix's and some other not Netflix, I didn't mean to name names, but a lot of studios are getting out there and are you got to read your contract very well. I've known a lot of production companies that have lost tons of money because they didn't read their contracts very well, and then the companies like Netflix and stuff take the tax credits. If they went to Kentucky and there's a 35% tax credit in Kentucky, and they shoot there, and then they end up, Netflix ends up buying the thing for nothing, so they can take that tax credit away from the producer. And so, I think that, I agree with Blair that there's not that many people making money. People are making a living, but that's not making money, and that's not going to survive.
So let's switch topics a little bit, because we are a technology and platforms panel. And I'm curious, what are the different major areas? Because we probably have a lot of people in the audience and that are not necessarily very technical or don't know this whole space. Maybe they're technical in traditional production, but what are some of the key areas that they should know about and that they need to think about when they're doing over the top? I know, Peter, you're obviously, Quello is a relatively new service provider that's coming in. Maybe you can start with some of the things that you think people should know, and then we'll hear from the other panelists as well.
Sure. Some of the differentiators, when you look at the market, when OVPs made a transition into OTTs.
Okay, and what are OVPs?
Open video platforms. So these are the Brightcoves, the Uyalas, the video processing middleware, if you will. They've linked up with a variety of third parties, and you're one of them. But between doing a subscription management all the way through the front end, and sometimes that data flow and that visibility of who that actual user is, that consumer, you can't market to them, you can't prevent churn. So having a more complete OTT solution that has actionable data built into it, that you have that visibility, that you can actively prevent churn or grow acquire more customers. Personalization is really what it comes down to. That is the differentiation in the marketplace, and you have to have actionable big data to understand who your end user is, and it goes back to the metadata as well. Even VR, you tie that into where did the user turn and how can you best monetize? Why they keep looking left, for instance, if you want to bridge the gap there. But it does come back to metadata and understanding how you're meshing that data into something that becomes a profitable business.
So it sounds like, one area that I need to know if I'm going into this business is, or make sure that I'm getting data and that I've also properly, if I'm hearing you guys right, tagged it correctly for metadata.
Proper governance, proper taxonomy, and making sure that the data is going properly. Taxonomy is the definition of your data. What does a certain word mean, and what does it mean to the consumer, and what does it mean to you in that? And so you have to have proper definitions, because a one word, something can mean something to somebody else and mean a different thing, a totally different thing to somebody else. Especially when you deal with jurisdiction, different countries and different cultures, you have to have proper taxonomy within your metadata and within that, because that is valuable there.
Are there standards that if I'm just getting into the business I should know, or is it all sort of depends on the service? I mean, where is it in terms of how do I know if I'm in want to be a new OTT player, how to go about?
The best way to do that is to copy the people who are successful. Look at Disney. Disney has an exceptional taxonomy, a platform of how they do things, and that's why they're so successful in taking their products from screen to second screen technologies to internet, and it all ties in together, and then they can cross geographical and global environments and still be able to use that thing to monetize, to make money, and understand it.
I think it's I think data's a little bit like design. You can't add it, right? If you think about when you're building a product, at some level you're really trying to test a hypothesis. You're trying to say, does this idea I have for a product work? And there's exactly one way to know the answer to that, which is to make sure you instrument, to make sure you have a language, a taxonomy, so you know the question you're asking, that you collect behavioral data from people so you know what they're actually doing, and you can figure out if you're successful, because otherwise there's a cloud of data surrounding you, and you got to know what matters and what doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, there's a company downstairs called Sabina that does very good work in market research, and it's important that you do invest some money into your thing to know where the market research is.
So other than data, because that's clearly important, there must be other technical areas I need to know about. Do I need to know about streaming? apps, devices? I don't know, Frederick?
Yeah, there's a bunch of them, but I think what we're trying to say here is that we're coming to the next phase. So it used to be a distribution problem, lots of technical problems. That's becoming table stakes. You can go to companies like us and a bunch of other companies. But I think we're getting into more of a customer management problem, how to actually get the data and capitalize on the consumers.
Yeah, I think apps are pretty simple now. I mean, if you want to put a platform, you can develop your own thing, or you can go to a company like Cisco, who has a great app. You pay a little bit more. You pay like $15,000 a month, and you can develop. And they have a platform. You just put your channel up there, and you can have a channel up there in a day. And they have a user base, and they have all this support and all that stuff. Or you can invest your own money and spend $8,000 a month. Maybe a little less, but it takes you a year to build it up. And so, but I think that all kind of stuff is pretty much played out, and we know where. I mean, it's going to change because the industry changes all the time. But I think it's done. I think.
Most of the problems that I see, because I get in a lot of situations where somebody launched an OTT system and they went version 1.0, and they used the video processing, the OVPs, if you will, and they've used the app side, and they've used a third party like Vendecia or Kling on the subscription, and they're seeing problems because there's no interconnect. So I think when you consider launching an OTT service, the more connections you have to the overall start to finish, the more control, the more visibility you're going to have. And then what people don't think about is add a marketing engine to that as well. How are you going to be relevant to, like, first, if you understand who your consumer is, have the ability to effectively market to them as well. And that's something that Quella does well, and that's why I joined, because previously I was running Kaltura services. So I was the managing director of US for Kaltura.
So,
I can just add to that. So what we see globally is that the customers are maturing a bit, so they go about this a bit different now. It used to be upstreams from the tech backend side and up to the sort of UI layer and the customer, but they're becoming more customer-centric. It sounds so simple, right? It's now they begin to, with the customer in mind, and think about how to design the service from the consumer in mind instead.
got it. So now I understand why I'm hearing all about data and not about other things, because that really seems to be the, how do I get to the audience? I have a couple of questions while we sort of start talking about the audience. So some of the things that I talked to you guys about was we got into a discussion about whether audiences are going to be watching linear or on demand. And I'm kind of curious because it seems like we've sort of keep coming back to data on the technical side, so I want to switch a little bit to consumer. How do you guys see as now that they can watch any different way? I mean, is linear still going to be important? It used to be the only way to do it. I'll just sort of throw it out there. Or is it, no, I want to watch content when I want to watch it, and that's it, other than live sports? I get that that's different. But, just in terms of experience, where do you guys see it going over the next 5 to 10 years?
I think you have to take into account that there's a lot of passive viewing going on. In other words, people will have the TV on all day long, and they're maybe not really watching it, but that gets tracked. So the TVs are on and they're not really engaged, but it's almost like having background music on.
Yeah, I mean, there's something satisfying about turning on the TV and it's just on. But on the other hand, you think about it, it's sort of the most ludicrous user experience in the world, where everybody there's billions of televisions in the world, everyone gets the same experience. When they come home at night, they turn it on, it plays them the thing it was playing in the morning when they turned it off and left the house. Instead of saying, welcome home, Blair, here's what you should be watching. So on one hand, things that are live and happening right now, they are what they are. You want them immediately. And we also like to be shown things. If my Facebook feed could just move itself sometimes, and I could just hold my phone, that'd be perfect. Wouldn't have to react. Having something delivered to you is great.
Just going back to the data we all talked about, I think it's not long before you can personalize the linear feeds. Then you have a good hybrid model where you actually have a linear feed which is personalized for you, which is good for.
How far away are we from that?
Not far. We have been doing some experiments with customers, so it's going to happen.
Yeah,
any day.
I think that one of the things, when you go back to machines, is say what technology is really up and coming. From what Blair is saying, I agree that one of the biggest things in technology that's going to great is AI. You know, the ability for the computer to learn about us and to adapt to us is going to help us, and that all goes back to metadata. Metadata drives AI. So, you know, but AI, you know, because my company sells cameras and lights and all that stuff. So I'm in business of buying equipment, so I think you should buy all the equipment if possible. But but in the aspects, I think that it's actually the, you know, things like AI and things like in the, you know, all that stuff that was explained in 1984 is the next up and coming thing.
What do you guys think? I know, Nathan, are you guys still looking, is it more on demand? Do you see somebody just doing a billboard channel that just has everything? Are we ways off from that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I'm the best person to answer that because we don't. We're a publisher and we have lots of video, but we're not in the TV business. But I think what I'm most fascinated by is the ideas around personalization, and I think it's really, really difficult. I think even the great content experiences that invest in a lot and are very data driven, like a Netflix, some of the others. I think most people would agree the personalization experience they have is still pretty imperfect. And one of the things that I've noticed that I'm curious about is search has really been diminished in a lot of those applications. So you actually have to look harder than you did before to search in an HBO or to search in a Netflix. And you know, when I think of how much Google knows about the people who use it, I think maybe inviting people to do that more could help with personalization, because I can't think of a property that knows more about people than Google, and it's based on and I get the reasoning for it. You want to make things easy for people and just click, or as you said, let continuous play experiences happen. But I think if you imposed a little more discovery on people, you might improve their personalization.
Yeah.
And we've only just, it's easy to say something's only just begun because that's the nature of technology, but if you look at personalization, everyone thinks, well, how much better can a recommendation algorithm on Netflix get? Not much. But it does. And you know, now it used to have genres on the homepage, and now it has because you liked, and now it has movies with a strong female lead, and it's getting more refined and subtle, and clearly the vocabulary underneath that's enabling it to make these recommendations is changing. But all of this is still sort of meta information about the movie or the TV show. There's no intra data about what's happening inside. There's no data about the music or the clothing or the people or the scenes or none of that exists yet, and it's all coming. So at that point, it'll be a whole other dimension of data about media and what's in it, and you know, will provide a million more ways of discovering and accessing stuff that you care about.
And it all comes back to, you know, when you are creating a show, you've got to start metadata from the beginning, because, you know, you've got to, it's from the lens. You've got to tell, because if you tell what the lens is using and what you're doing in the ends, it makes editorial cheaper. And when you put up, you know, when you put your mouse over a Netflix thing, it's going to tell you who's in that scene. That doesn't just happen automatically. That has to be entered in. Studios are going to, and actually Amazon and Netflix have announced that they're going to cut what they pay for shows that don't have proper metadata. And eventually, if you don't have proper metadata, they won't do it, because it'll cost them too much money to input that data. So if you don't don't start metadata from the beginning, it's your shows are going to be worth much less.
Are you saying that there's scene level data in Netflix has scene level data that they're surfacing in the
a lot of it, yes.
I haven't seen that. That's cool.
If you're on a computer and you hover your mouse over a scene, you can see usually who the actors are in that scene, and they have automatic metadata tagging that can kind of do that with facial recognition and stuff like that. So there's some automated things that they have with that, but there's also a lot of tagging that goes on. And Netflix is spending $180 million a year putting in tags to movies all the time, and they're going to go through their incomplete lot. And other companies, Disney is investing hundreds of millions of dollars into meta tagging all their old shows, so that they can have that available, so that they can do the things that you want.
Yeah.
Where's it, that kind of brings up another thought for me, the whole idea of curation versus can machines really learn it all and tell me exactly what I want to watch? Because I've always heard over the years that services like Pandora, when they started, and Netflix, do have a lot of people sitting around and figuring out how to describe the different titles that you're watching. And obviously, if we talk linear, there's this whole world of people who are programmers and schedulers and think this goes after this. And in radio, I mean, is all that, where do you guys think? I mean, is there always going to be a place for curation and getting you not just content that fits this bucket, but the best content to see next? Or is that going to go away at some point?
I think it's going to be more automated. Less,
It needs
So
to
no
be.
more
It
people?
needs to be automated. You know, right now there is a variety of technologies out there that will get you to 90%, and you can extract even the audio file and create, you know, all the metadata from that. But you have to go beyond that because you want to make the most out of most opportunity out of each asset, which is when you get into a manual process and you tag, then you could change it into a merchandising opportunity or a sponsorship opportunity. And I think that's where the market's going. And some of that becomes a decision of a human, but for it to be cost effective, it needs to be automated a lot better.
I think for us, we still view it a little bit of a split because you know, the vehicle for us to drive videos is really the stories we write. So I think for that first view, we have a point of view that curation is really important. You know, we want to make sure that machine learning doesn't sort of inject or associate the wrong video with the story. There can be a lot of like nuances to where that there's a terrible mismatch that, you know, AI might not support. I think once you're beyond that first view and into second and hopefully many more views, then that personalization and sort of an automated engine is a no-brainer. I don't think you can rely on customized playlists and things like that.
But it depends what you mean by curation, because if you want to know whether it works, meaning human beings showing things to other human beings, look at your Facebook feed. That works really well. Like 2 billion people can't be wrong. So, you know, in that regard, having human beings discover and package and present things for other human beings is clearly still growing at an extraordinary rate and incredibly effective. But that doesn't mean it's, there's a role for that in the same way there's a role for having machines do things where you need, where something has grown greater than sort of organic human scale. Like the amount of video you could possibly watch is beyond any imaginable human scale. So you need machines to deal with it. That doesn't eliminate the need and the value of having human beings curate things for other human beings any more than it does in a museum.
Yeah, I'll give you a live example of what happened recently. Johnny Depp did two interviews. He did one on 2020 and he did one on the Colbert Show. On the 2020 show, if you look at the metadata and what it was talking about the show, it was Johnny Depp talks about Pirates of the Caribbean. But Johnny Depp did a whole talk on both shows about his literacy campaigns, about new relationships he has, and all of that was done on the Colbert Show. The Colbert Show had 495,000 more hits within 24 hours than the 2020 did. Now, you can put all kinds of different things on that, but a lot of it had to do with all that metadata and the people, and that people were looking for things like literacy campaigns and stuff like that, which drove people to that show to watch that feed. So that's a real world example of how metadata makes more money.
Let's talk a little bit about international versus the U.S., because we're obviously a lot of people here are focused on the U.S., but a lot of people are also trying to look internationally. I mean, are we way ahead of the rest of the world here, or are we behind in areas? I mean, I'd be interested in hearing just because several of you work internationally, what are some of the differences, or are there certain markets that there are different things going on, either with OTT, and then I won't forget our VR part of the panel too, and just generally. What are you guys seeing that's different?
Political climate.
Other than political.
But if you look globally, so the TV market is about $300 billion globally, and 90% is still pay TV globally. So it's in most cases behind the US in terms of OTT. And we see big adoption rate now for OTT in LATAM and APAC, who are really chasing each other to get there first. It's a big big drive there.
I don't think the fundamentals are different. And by that I mean the things that will obtain, in years to come that are already existing now, but in years to come, like the fact that things will be happening over the top more than they are through things that are not over the top. But it's about where each country is now and how you get from here to there. Because some places have very high satellite penetration, some people don't have fixed phone, in the way that some people don't have fixed phone lines and skipped all that and went straight to mobile, and there's versions of that, incumbent business models, incumbent infrastructure that varies wildly throughout the world. So, we operate in many countries, and you have to know what you're doing, right? I mean, China is a very different place to try and do what we're doing from the United States of America.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what about, we haven't mentioned Europe at all. I mean, are there certain markets, is Europe very similar to here in some of the Western European markets, or is it also a little further behind or ahead? I know they were much bigger in mobile sooner in some ways than we are here. Just curious.
It's quite similar. And Scandinavia is probably ahead of the American market, but otherwise I think it's fairly similar.
But also things like pricing, I think the average revenue for the average cost of traditional pay TV service in the US is like $84 a month, something like that. Countries that you wouldn't expect to be really cheap, so some European countries, Western European countries, you can get a decent TV service for 10 euros, sometimes 15. So at that point, lots of things change, because there are lots of things that are worth doing when it's $84 that are just not remotely worth doing when it's $10 to $15. So some countries just aren't bothering with a lot of the things that the US is, and vice versa.
Yeah, I think
They haven't got to that sort of inflection point.
I think when you're running a business and you're going international, you need to actively target each geographical region almost as its own business opportunity, because there's going to be a variety of cost implications. Like everyone knows, Amazon, if you're serving content in Latin America, is going to be 4x. Then so there's different operational cogs. There's different storefronts. There's different monetization. Australia has the highest CPM out there, for instance, and then China's the opposite of that. But there's different costs and different rules and regulations you have to go through. I think, looking at that when you're rolling out an international business, you want to be very precise about how you attack it. Now, that being said, if you're a provider like me, actively looking for new OTT opportunities, as I'm reaching out to the likes of the majors, whether it's Viacom, the international properties are low-hanging fruit for me, because that's usually where they're test bedding me in those areas, because they have a domestic team that is under their own control. You can't touch domestic, so you look for the international opportunities. That being said, the biggest opportunities out there are in service providers. That's where multi-million-dollar contracts are being done for telco-grade services internationally. That's where the low-hanging fruit is.
Yeah.
It's interesting, so it's them hiring US companies to do?
Yes, that's correct.
I do think it's interesting, when you travel, that you'll see some of the add-on services priced totally differently. The one that comes to mind is something like NFL Sunday Ticket, which very expensive in the United States, and although sort of your choice of platform for accessing it has evolved and gotten better, I've been places overseas where it's shockingly cheap, and you can just log in through a web browser and get the feed. So obviously the affinity for the sport is probably different in those places, but they're forced to price it totally differently, which is pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
Interesting. There's one area that I'm particularly interested in, although I know none of you are working specifically in it, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts on all these virtual MVPDs that are popping up. So the YouTube TVs, the Hulu's upcoming service, View, Sling. Is that going to give me, as a consumer, a much different experience than what I'll be getting over the more traditional cable and satellite, or is it just a price? Today they can try to do skinny bundles and get new people in. I mean, is there really something here that will completely transform, or in any way transform, what the linear feeds will look like? Anybody following them, looking at them?
Well, I think that what I see in this is that it's just a different model, and it's but even Yahoo, Google has said that this is not a long-lasting model for them. This is a temporary way, a temporary way for them to get more revenue and to sell this thing. But this is not a long last. It's not going to be a long lasting, and it's not going to drive. It's not going to drive traditional. Traditional's going to drive it.
So what is it? I'm curious, what do you mean when it's not going to be long-lasting? Like they're not going to do it for a
Because-
long time,
no,
or they
be-
think
because
it's going
all
away?
Because
or-
all the VR platforms that are out there are designed on what we think of VR today, and what we are to think of VR today is.
Oh, so we're thinking of VR. Okay, so now
So
this
VR
is
is going to change entirely, 100%.
Oh, okay. So you're talking about like the Oculus and those are going
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
YouTube and the
and
Daydream.
more
Okay.
than that, even just
Yeah.
other ways of viewing VR or
Mm-hmm.
or any of that is going to change, and
Mm-hmm.
they've announced that that they're putting this money in this because there's money to be made.
Mm-hmm.
There's people who will go there because of today's technology.
Mm-hmm.
To tomorrow's technology will not be around that, so that will go away at one point.
Mm-hmm.
But that is being driven by standard videos are using that to create the VR version. So it's VR version it's not regular version is not affected by VR. VR is affected by regular.
Got it. And then I was also thinking about these new linear services that are popping up. So the Sling TV is a good example of PlayStation View.
Okay.
That's sort of it's a bundle of TV, but it's over the internet as opposed to over a traditional.
Do you mean the user experience? or do
Yeah,
you
I
mean
was
the
curious because I
content?
know you work a lot in the space. Is the user experience much different? Is it going to be, or is it different now? Is it going to be different than, will Comcast, well, Comcast isn't a good example, will Charter and all the others, or DirecTV, will it all be the same experience, or is it going to be a different experience if I subscribe to one of these?
I feel like
Sure.
the days of anyone really differentiating on UI are kind of over.
Yeah.
Let's keep VR out of it. Right?
Yeah,
And
but
AR
put
and all
VR,
that shit
yeah.
we haven't figured out yet.
Yep.
But I think the days of someone coming up with the greatest UI in the world are kind of over. I think what's going to make a difference is the content, obviously, and everyone's experimenting with new things. Every skinny bundle is new. The people that are making bundles that they say aren't skinny but really are, those are all new, and they're all making different bets. And you've got companies like Fullscreen, who's sort of having this hybrid model, a bunch of traditional movie and TV content with a bunch of digital first content. So let's assume there's arbitrary mixes of content. I think what will really differentiate is back to what we said earlier, is about what will differentiate the experience will be data.
And you
Will
think
be
the big
data and the
guys,
ability to process it and act on it and put actionable things in front of consumers.
Yeah.
so will the DirecTVs of the world be able to give me a personalized experience at
Sure.
some point? I mean, I know probably some of the others, so.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
everybody's going to get there. Great. I'll have sort of a wrap-up question for the panelists, and then we'll also open it up to the audience. So I'm curious from you guys, what do you see as what would be the big trend or the big money-making area over the next year or two? Like, where would you invest your money today? What's an area that we'll all be looking at and saying, "Gee, I wish I had done that over the next could be a couple of years, few years," and I'll sort of throw it out there in any order.
Buying bitcoins.
Bitcoins. Okay.
I would put my money on
Now?
Silicon Valley company disrupting the TV industry.
Which companies?
One of the Silicon
Oh,
Valley
Silicon
companies.
Valley.
So Google is obvious candidate.
So you think
Facebook,
Google
yeah.
over Facebook over Amazon? Or?
At least over Comcast or
Ah.
one of the big ones.
I go back to putting your money on metadata platforms. That's where I would look at creating analytics. If you want to create something that's going to really affect the way it's going to go, who owns what and how packages are put together and stuff like that. I think that the days of Time Warners and all those are going to go away because everyone's doing their own network, and I would look at I would look at more at the sports industry because that's gonna be the biggest thing. Now that ESPN and Fox Sports are creating their own networks, the bundles that they're gonna create, that's gonna be a big moneymaker in how it does, because the sports is really what drives a lot of the internet.
And any particular companies that you guys think, I should have asked when we were talking a lot about data before, any companies that you think are particularly interesting for people maybe not the one to run and invest in, or, just companies doing interesting, from sort of the data providers I'm looking for, or the people, either doing analytics or data,
Kind of hard to come up with a really good answer that doesn't begin with the words Google or Facebook.
Okay,
Yeah, I
just
mean, Google
curious.
and
So-
Facebook-
so-
Amazon
The
could
thing
be.
about data, the thing
Yeah.
about data is, big data is it's big.
Mm-hmm.
And the number of companies that have the resources to deal with stuff on that scale, you
Mm-hmm.
still need, somewhere you need data centers full of computers.
Mm-hmm.
The number of small or medium-sized companies that can really make a dent in that is small.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That it will happen a lot, but it's hard to know at this point, especially in the media business. So from my
Yeah,
perspective,
I go
who's
back
gonna
to
make
the
a difference?
Cisco thing that I talked about with Cisco creating this channel. So there's a number of bigger companies, not as big as Google and Facebook, but that are creating platforms, and they're spurting them by creating really good metadata rich environments. So those are going to be some, the Google and Facebook is hard to make money because they're so big now, and there's so little money to really be made unless you invest mass money. But finding the mid-range companies like Cisco that have burgeoning technologies for platforms, that's going to probably where I would put the money. Now, if I knew, I wouldn't be here.
So how about, what
I
about
hear
the
about
rest of you?
Cisco
Yeah.
systems.
I just add that
Yeah.
I think Apple, I'll be really interested in what they're doing a year from now, because they are doing things slightly differently. I mean, everybody's impressed with their products, but they're starting to take a much more curated approach and get invested in content. I mean, I think whether people are aware of it or not, Apple News has been this really growing and successful platform, and I think I read today that they hired their first editor-in-chief, someone from New York Mag, so that's very interesting. There's a lot of predictions about them getting into original television and film content too, and the huge advantage they have is they can, as they do those things, they can make those native applications directly on your phone, and I think that's why as they went into something like Apple News, that was just a huge advantage, and in particular in a platform like that, they're very interested in what they call enterprise journalism, and that seems like a competitive advantage that some of the social platforms have with the fake news and sort of things that are driven virally for different reasons. So I'll be very interested in what they're doing a year from now.
What do they mean by enterprise journalism?
So their definition of that is really something that takes a point of view and invests in it, so that's not a commodity. So you're not just writing that like Anderson Cooper re-signed for 5 years at CNN, which anybody can cover that story, and there's no real advantage to sort of publishing it 5 seconds earlier than the next. So
Right.
they really solicit the publishers they work with to do unique cover story, long form
Right.
features, and things that might even be a little off brand for them. Maybe investigative journalism from someone you think of as purely an entertainment source.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Anything else? Who hasn't had a chance to say what will be the big story or the big thing you would invest in, or for the next year or two?
I would look at, the obvious players, Google and Facebook. I mean, they're on the edge. Google had a few misfires, with Google Glasses and with Google Plus, but something tells me there's something going to happen very big, and and the whole, especially with the whole predictive analytics game. Disney, I think, is a company to watch because while they're the only studio with a defined brand, I think their technology is also first class and cutting edge. And there's a small company that fascinates the hell out of me called Parrot Analytics. And they're being used by Variety right now to show, the relative popularity of TV shows and content. But they have a very, very interesting model where they sample everything that's going online. Not just like, there are some ad agencies that we monitor social media, but these guys weight everything. I mean, from Wikipedia edits to Wikipedia lookups to Yelp reviews, and it's just a very, very interesting company. If you look them up sometime, Parrot Analytics.
Interesting.
Very good company.
Anybody else? Let's see. Do we open it up to questions from the audience? You guys have questions? We have a great group of panelists right here.
We haven't talked a lot about VR, but I was an advertiser and we wouldn't invest in VR because there wasn't a scale. And now that I work in entertainment, I wouldn't invest in VR because there's no audience either. So how do you see VR maybe growing up, becoming an adult, and how would you see it actually generating any revenue for anyone?
Can you ask me that in 2 years?
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, there really is no revenue except for helping other platforms get revenue.
I think mobile VR has to be the thing that reaches mass market first. That's the way I would.
And that's more AR. That's more AR anyway, right?
AR.
I mean, a friend of mine wrote VRML, or VRML as it was known, in 1995. That was the virtual reality markup language, and that was 1995. And the device is still just under the weight that won't break your neck.
Yeah, I mean, right now,
long
too much
way
of
to
VR
go.
is still a novelty. You know, I mean, even PlayStation VR. You know, I mean, I got the VR headset. I played Batman. I did the horror roller coaster, and I'm over it.
My impression from the couple of VR projects that I've done recently is that all the money basically comes from the platforms, either directly, or so it's either, you know, Oculus or Vive or, you know, Google funding production, and maybe the company then fund, you know, a company that they're hiring subcontracts out. But from what I've seen, ultimately, it seems like that's really the money. It's not even, I was thinking more advertisers would be, but I don't know if this
And does that feel, when you work with these companies, does that feel experimental? Does it feel like they're trying to keep a seat at the table, or does it feel like they're betting on a business with a business plan?
What's challenging, and this is so a project I'm working on, I've got a work for hire production company, which is mostly what it is, trying to figure out how do I raise more money, because they're very bootstrapped.
Right.
And it's what's the business case that you can bring to somebody. On the one hand, they're doing beautiful production and getting a lot of gigs. You know, and I'm almost wondering, is the answer raise your rates a little bit so that you have a little more breathing room, because it's, you know, it really is an interesting dilemma. Or do, you know, the other things we've looked at is do we move into the AR space or start looking at areas there, and please, investor, give us a little money so we can really do a deeper dive into applications made for financial technology, or should we be moving into games, but they don't have the resources to explore it. So it's an interesting dilemma, I think, for investor, you know, to make an investor pitch right now, because there have been a lot of companies that have gotten a lot of money.
That's-
And the question is why?
To answer your question, though, it's back to your statement earlier, which was you got to get rid of the glasses. And if you get rid of the glasses, you end up with 360 video today. And there is opportunities out there that are actively monetizing against 360 video. And certainly that's now being supported and driven by some of the social networking platforms, too. So I think it's a progressive step towards getting rid of the goggles.
Could you go into like how they're getting financed right now?
The opportunities are coming in through a variety of different means, usually ad-supported. And there's a variety of different ads and how you place ads. So, like, for instance, there's an opportunity that we're dealing with Podcast One and Adam Carolla, and being kind of an intimate, where you can do a subscription and you feel like it's more immersive, more embracing to have that experience. So there's opportunity. There's money being made in VR. It's just not enough to move anybody's needle.
And it's not really entertainment, right? I mean, I think that an experience that immersive has amazing applications. Visualization for chemists and playing with molecules, and for military. There's loads of applications. Just not any of them involve sitting at home next to your girlfriend with matching headsets.
There is one area that kind of ties into that, where there are location-based, so there are VR arcades and VR, and then bigger installations. So there's one that the Dreamscape VR people will have in Westfield Mall later, where you won't have to buy your own headset. You will go in and you will pay $15 or $20 and you will have an experience. And kind of like IMAX has something over by the Grove that's experimental. So that is one area, because you don't have to buy it yourself, but a lot of what I've heard too is it's much more going to be about AR and medical and things in the
I
near
think
term.
that, you know, that there's something systemically wrong within an industry that cost 8.6%. 8.6 times the production costs, and 47.3% of the population can't watch it for more than 15 minutes, and 13% of the population can't watch it at all.
Yeah.
So when you have a model like that, and you're spending, you're spending that much more revenue, and almost 50% of your population is not going to be able to watch your product, there's a systemic problem there.
And I think I'd agree more with get rid of the goggles than get rid of the glasses, because I think if you give someone like a Warby Parker type style glasses, whether it's AR or VR, I think it'd be similar to how much electric cars stumbled before Tesla started making cool electric cars. So I think there's a visual device that you could use as long as it's fashion friendly and not the headsets.
Great.
You go back to Dreamscape, a movie with Christopher Walken. You start the movie, and the guy had this gigantic headset like this big, and he ended up with these tiny little things touching his touching his temple, and that was what they ended up with, and that's what we've got to end up with.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, we've seen a lot of interesting experimentation. I mean, remember the 3D days? I mean, that was supposed to be so big. And then you had on the one hand, you had the problem with the glasses. I mean, to the point where I got a 3D TV, and the Best Buy guy didn't know which glasses went with it. I ended up with with Panasonic, their headquarters. They didn't know because they had so many different glasses. So I never saw a 3D movie on it. And then you saw these really weird no glasses 3D TVs. It looked like the dog scratch collars. I remember Toshiba came out with that, and it was like, this is just ridiculous.
Terrific. Great. Well, I see it is just 5 o'clock, and so it's time to we'll get everybody out to drinks and go enjoy your evening in the end. Thank you so much for coming to the end of the conference. Let's give our panelists a great round of applause. Doing a great job.
Just want to
Thank
say
you.
one more thing. If any,
Yes.
I'm videotaping this, so it'll be on at YouTube /Advantage Video Systems. So if you want to view this at a